Thanks to all of the panelists for some very enlightening opening remarks. Maybe let's pick up on Stephanie's comments and some of the other comments the panelists have made about the complexity of the system, the many factors that influence energy decision making. It seems like we're moving in a direction of expecting more of the regulatory system and expecting more of the project proponent. In a world where technology is changing rapidly, if you look at the future energy system, there's going to be more integration, yet we regulate very much in a siloed type manner. Interested in the panel's perspective on whether can the system keep up, or is it being overburdened by complexity and expectations? And to your point, Stephanie, what's the right pace? And at the same time, we're in a very complex, very competitive global environment where we're trying to keep up, not only keep up, but beat, if you will, competitors on the global stage. So perspectives on how the system is working and what we need to do to make it more adaptable, more flexible, and more responsive, frankly, to the transition that we're in the middle of going through, or perhaps at the early stages of going through. Ralph, you want to take that one on to start? I know you've got something to say about this.
I was wondering, it's just like spinning the wheel and it landed on me, right? Well, first of all, on the competitive question, I guess I would respond maybe not in the way that you were implying. The challenge to Canada, and we're almost unique in the OECD this way, is we have such an abundance of low-priced fuel and electricity, generally speaking, in this country, that it's softened the incentive for us to be innovators in the broader energy system. And so much of the much of the innovation that's going on in that system is coming from countries that, like Germany and Japan or wherever, that have the higher priced energy commodities. So in that sense, I do worry about our competitive position in the coming energy system, in the clean energy system, because we have been slow to get on with it, and we have some disadvantages related to our abundance of cheap energy, I think. And this is what makes innovation policy so important right now, one of the things in this country, because the oil and gas industry has been almost single-handedly shouldering the balance of trade in this country for some time. And when that goes away, if that goes away, and we no longer have that $50 or $60 billion contribution to our trade balance coming from that sector, we are going to need to be selling something else into the international marketplace, or it's going to be, it's not going to be a good story. We can live with many of the other economic consequences of a declining fossil fuel industry, I believe, and I think Alberta as well can. Alberta is particularly blessed in that regard. But the balance of payment issue is scary to me. Yeah. On the first question, are we overburdening regulators? I don't know. I mean, I haven't been heavily involved in that system. It's probably better for other panelists to opine on that. I would say that the few assessments that I have been involved with over my life, and every single one of them has resulted in avoiding stranded assets, not in causing them. So when we're gnashing our teeth and worrying about the impact of regulatory barriers and impedances to project approvals, let's not forget that those same assessment procedures have also helped us making some really bad investments over the last 20 years, and really large. Like, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars that didn't happen because by the time the assessment ran its course, it was clear that it was no longer a good idea from a business point of view. This happens over and over again. I don't know if that will be the case with Trans Mountain. I don't know, and we won't know. When we ask, are we getting the balance right? There's no way you can answer that question. Maybe 30 years from now, we'll be able to look back and say, gee, too bad we built that pipeline, or gee, it's a good thing we didn't. But right now, I don't think you can answer it.
Other thoughts? Lisa?
I definitely have a few. Certainly, I don't see this as necessarily expecting more from the proponent. I think much to your question that you posed in your series of papers is who decides. I think we still have to start asking the question, answering the question, who does what? So, for example, in a regulatory proceeding around the development of an asset that needs a leave to construct or a certificate of public convenience and necessity, we have usually, at minimum, 10 different approaches to the economic assessment of supply and demand. We don't need 10 different assessments of supply and demand. We do need an annual IEA, EIA type assessment of supply and demand for specific commodities, and we need to be able to rely on that to test it, but not to reinvent the wheel. And the cost associated with that, and I would be one of the costs, so not in my self-interest to say that, is huge. The time is huge. So getting some uniform information out there on basic parameters like supply and demand, the state of commercialization of existing activities, and I just want to follow up on Stephanie's point. You know, nobody credits Canada for being literally a world leader on methane measurement, capture, and use, and we are. We're amongst the world's very best, and it's a tragedy that I would disagree that, you know, our technology in clean tech is being developed in Germany and Japan. Clean tech's being developed in Canada, but sold in Germany and Japan. Our RNG is being sold in the California market. Why? Because we can't get our act together? Forget it. It's time we got our act together. We got to figure out these processes, and let's have a Marshall McLuhan moment. Do we need 5,000 interveners in a proceeding, or do we need to have a social media strategy to make sure that people feel as though they've had a right to be heard, to make sure that views are reflected? We need to shake up the traditional regulatory model to make sure that people have the opportunity to express their views, and we can move forward in a much more streamlined fashion.
Chris, I just wanted to come to you. You commented on C69, and Mike, you've in the paper also commented on C69. And just picking up on Lisa's comment, this question of you know, how much is enough in terms of engagement, and what do we do in terms of actually making people feel like they're part of the process and informed and knowledgeable in terms of their ability to comment if they wish to, versus the flip side of that, which is to say we need an efficient process that moves us to regulatory decisions in an efficient way. When you look at C69, for example, and I don't want to focus on that unduly, but this question of what's the right process and time frame and mechanism to engage versus the need to get to efficient decisions, regulatory decisions that are broadly supported. Comments?
One of the perspectives that we need to keep in mind is that there's the regulatory authority and the process structure around that. But then there's the policy side of it. The policy needs to be sorted out beforehand. So consultation policy, from a government's perspective, from a stakeholder's perspective, that needs to be sorted out. So the regulator's not trying to, in a way, playing a game of 60 questions, kind of saying, hey, am I there yet? Am I there yet? Am I there yet? Those kinds of things need to be decided up front, along with a lot of other policy issues, so that framework is there for the regulator to implement, and you get more clarity from that.
Mike?
Yeah, just there's any number of points one could pursue on this, but I mean the first one is I go back to my point about the still gap in getting at the policy issues. And Lisa, I take your point. I mean, the climate and energy are they are intertwined. That's inescapable. It's not like 20 or 30 years ago. But intertwined or not, there are at least two narratives running that cannot be put on the same page and reconciled, at least not when you put the numbers with them. And we keep skipping past that. And so even within the federal government, and I don't want to be unfair here, but I mean, we have the generation energy process going on, and I think that's terrific. And again, kudos to Minister Carr for getting that going. But I have a sneaking feeling, and it sort of goes back to when I was the ADM of the energy sector in the 1990s, is that NRCan and Environment Canada probably aren't talking to each other. And if anybody's talking to NRCan, then I don't know who they are, but who Environment Canada and probably the Centre are having a jolly conversation about what they're going to do to meet our 2030 commitments. The two are, if they may be on parallel or diverging paths, but they aren't being reconciled. So I guess, Dave, that would be one thing that I think is absolutely vital. And as long as that remains unresolved, it's just going to land right back on top of individual projects.
Just Lisa, before you comment, and Bob, I know you want to comment as well, and I don't see a microphone out there, but I would encourage questions from the audience as well. So Lisa, and then Bob, and then maybe we'll see if anybody's got a question out there.
Yeah, let me just jump in on that point, because I think that certainly there have been challenges of silos that we've seen historically, but I'm very much of the strong view that we're not going to reach our climate change commitments alone. You cannot do this on the current trajectory of the Canadian economy without engaging the value of our exports, without engaging the power of the emission reductions that result from our innovation. And so let's look at Japan. They have a tiny little mechanism, which is not so tiny anymore, that constitutes an innovation export strategy. The Japanese now it's called the joint crediting mechanism. So every time they export one of their clean technologies, they have a bilateral agreement with that country to say, we're going to figure out how we repatriate some of the emission reductions that result from that. Look at our methane reduction technology. Why can't we do that? Look at a number of our energy storage technologies that are deployed in Germany, that are deployed around the world. Look at some of our manufacturers and our industrial gas users, who are some of the very best and most efficient in the world. Why can't we have a clean energy label on that, or a climate compliant label on that, and harness the value for that?
Bob, did you have a comment? And then we'll go to Stephanie, and then we'll go to the floor.
Sure. I just think it's a really difficult and interesting nexus to explore, the idea that the regulator oftentimes concentrating on the question of safety, with what Lisa had identified as sort of another question about standing and a right to be heard. And sort of my sense is, from things that I've seen, if people don't feel comfortable on their right to be heard or to be heard, then they start questioning standing, and then they question safety. So really finding a way, whether it's through the regulator or through other political and social devices, so that people can be heard, I think is going to become increasingly important, and we haven't done a very good job of it, that's for sure.
Yes, Lisa said something I really think it's true, is we won't achieve anything alone, and I think that's why we really believe in the carbon market. That's why in the decision making we're really looking forward to what will happen in Ontario with the carbon market, because a ton is a ton, and carbon is not like pollution. It's global, and there's a need for a better energy decision making, but there's clearly a need to inform the population, to explain. In Quebec, we've got a carbon market going for almost 5 years, and no one knows what it is and what it's used for and why it's in place. So if we want to build confidence, and so people are understanding after, no matter who's deciding, they need to be informed. And there's a need for political courage. Sometimes it's easier for them not to explain their decision.